Welcome, Nationalists. I'm here with Dr. Jim Saleam of the Australia First Party, and we're here to dissect, deconstruct and rip apart the 2022 federal election result. Jim, what does it mean?
Well, let's deal initially with an absolute fundamental. There's a lot of Australians out there who regard the major political parties as different things. That is, different entities, different ideological products, different politics. Substantially, that is not true. The analogy I would draw is that if we went into a supermarket and looked up soap powder, we will find that one brand has got more lemon than the other, one's got rose petal flavours than the other. Bottom line, they're both washing powders. They do the same thing, they're functional. The two major political parties should not really be conceived as political parties per se. They're actually faces of those who own Australia. They're faces of the state. But in this particular election, what's happened is the props of both of these parties have been pulled out from beneath them to a certain extent by a huge bleeding away of votes to all sorts of independents and other people. Before we even assess the quality of these people and what they actually are, the Labor Party's lost votes, the Liberal National parties have lost votes, and they've gone somewhere else. So what we should initially say is that the system that we have in Australia is a type of globalism. These parties represent globalism, and a prop of globalism has been pulled away. In other words, the sanctity and the stability of the party political system. That's point number one. Point number two is there have been a lot of protest parties and one-issue parties, from the legalised cannabis people through to medical options parties, or elect some bloke to the upper house and the ACT, or Drew Pavlou and his crew. All of these things are peripheral to the real issue, and they're all ephemeral. They'll all be gone by the time of the next election. In other words, Australian politics, the formalisation of Australian politics, the electoral contest, is becoming a lot less stable, a lot less predictable. The third point, which I think makes many Australians happy, is some of the politicians we could really regard as evil pieces of work, that is, as individuals. They can always be replaced, there's always some there to do the job. But if you look at certain people like Christina Keneally, I could write you a book on her. Bad news, didn't make it. Josh Frydenberg, a great hero of globalist economics, didn't make it. Tim Wilson, a hero of many social causes, didn't make it. Ditto with Trent Zimmerman, didn't make it. The Minister for Israel, David Sharma, didn't make it. So a lot of these people are now out of Parliament, which of course from any nationalist's point of view is in fact a good thing. I've often said that it's sometimes good that perhaps the highly efficient ALP trader is replaced by a Liberal Party used car salesman who can't, figure out economics from the Encyclopedia Britannica. All of those things are good outcomes. Is the Parliament itself a good outcome for Australia this time? Well, no, it's not, for other reasons.
Yeah, well, I want to know what those reasons are.
Okay, well, let's look at it from the point of view of the dynamics of it. There's an intensification of the globalist agenda from other directions. A lot of these very interesting women who've now turned up as so-called independents. The teal independents, a small L liberals to a T. There they are. They're all in favour of certain globalist prescriptions for climate fluctuation. They don't have any independent view on it. They're following the official line. The refugee issue, we'll probably find now the ALP will be much more embracing of it. The globalist attempt to break open all borders will become more intense. We'll find that opposition to it, the Liberal Party now has a new objective. It's got to market itself again as some sort of pseudo-conservative force to get Australians, corral them in if they're the official opposition. We'll find that, contrary to what some people think, this idea that the Labor Party is, quote, left-wing. No, the Labor Party is no more left-wing than the Liberal Party is right-wing. As I said, they are both establishment parties. They are both parties of globalism. They simply project what we say are different faces out into the community. Anthony Albanese, where is he now? He's on his way to Tokyo to be a running dog for Joe Biden. He'll be following all the standard lines that Morrison advocated only last week. But there will be an intensification of it. So this is an opportunity for the globalists to remake Australia. You'd remember that the very first thing that Albanese virtually said when he got on the stage there the other day to claim victory is he was talking about a First Nations voice in the Constitution. Well, nationalists don't recognise our Aboriginal people as First Nations. That's United Nations claptrap. The Aboriginal peoples are the Aboriginal peoples. Finished, that's who they are. But Albanese has a different agenda with these folk, and he wants to write things into the Constitution. There's an old adage, be very careful what you wish for. Some Aboriginal leaders haven't realised it yet, but this is a globalist agenda. It's designed to crack open borders. When borders are completely cracked open and demolished, forget about your so-called land rights. There's simply no such thing. And that's the first thing that Albanese said. He was going to put an Indigenous voice in the Constitution. What he really means is he's going to change the concept of Australian ownership, Australian land. What he's really talking about is it's globalism. There's no benefit for any Aboriginal person in that. That's the first thing he said. And there's more to come. He was embraced by Penny Wong, an ardent Asianiser. Well, of course she is. Of course she is. She's an Asianiser by virtue of being a person of Asian origin. She's advocated that for years. She was also, until recently, and it became unfashionable, a Sinophile. That's now been reversed, of course, because China wants to ultimately attack their prize asset, Taiwan. So you find that these people are now the official face of Australia, and official faces do mean something. The way in which Australia will be presented is it will be a progressive force of globalism. So if we're talking about an opposition to this, we better get our act together and get it together very, very quick.
All right, but there's some contradictions happening here because, as you said, and as they said, they're there to remake Australia. But if Australia was already in the globalist image of under Scott Morrison, who I think we'd describe as centre, almost bordering on moving to the left, then what the hell, has Albanese got in mind, except perhaps this issue of Aboriginal voice in the Constitution? And my second point is that if a hostile stance towards China is very much in the Quads, very much on the Quads agenda, and the Sinophile tendencies of the Labor Party seek more appeasement from China, wouldn't that put it at odds with their mate Sleepy Joe's teleprompter controllers and his caregivers?
The arguments in Australia between the rise of the Chinese imperialism and the decline of the US one, there is no doubt in my mind that the ALP, like Morrison, will increasingly pursue a pseudo, and I repeat pseudo, anti-China line. They're not interested in removing Chinese immigrants. They're not necessarily keen to dismantle every aspect of Chinese investment, but they are keen to make sure that they stand with their allies over the issue of Taiwan, and when they trade with China, they trade to advantage. I think that the former line that they pursued, which was the appeasement of China, the ALP will now reverse. But we have to ask ourselves the question, anti-appeasement for what? The Australian Nationalists have said we will not die for Taiwan. Any involvement in a war over Taiwan is not in the Australian national interest. But this is ultimately where the system is trending. Should China be the one to fire the first shot, they will go to war for Taiwan. Speaking as a nationalist, I don't wish to die for Taiwan. That's an entirely separate question. But you'll see the ALP, part of the logic of change is the internal push against, let's say, established groups and established communities. The ALP will now proceed as quickly as possible against recalcitrant elements in the countryside and other places, groups that do not accept the multi-culti, multiracial, globalised economy that had come into being. So if you're a farmer who wants to oppose the inland rail, or you're a person who's suspicious of gas drilling on your property, or you're a person living in a suburb overrun with ethnic crime, the ALP government will move against you. And this sort of internal push, in my view, is designed to further marginalise productive Australians and Australians with the Australian sentiment while they get on with the process of globalism. The ALP can do that sometimes because of historical origin. The historical origin of social democracy lies in this type of pseudo-liberalism, the human rights industry and whatnot. That's a little different to the origin of the Liberal Party. But we always ask ourselves, have the Liberals ever undone anything that the human rights industry people do? And the answer is no, they don't, because fundamentally they follow it through themselves. There's money to be made, profit to be earned. So we'll see the ALP proceed ruthlessly against sections of the community that still resist the Globo agenda. And I think these teal independents will be co-opted into that very successfully.
Well, these teal independents are indicative of a division within the chattering classes themselves, aren't they?
Yes, indeed they are. We can't always assume that the people who are anti-Australian always speak with a single voice, because they don't. Often they argue with each other and they quarrel, and those things need to be taken into account by nationalist-minded people in coming up with strategies. It's the same with the so-called conservative camp. Nationalists are not conservatives, but from time to time some of the disputes within conservatism can be taken to advantage. It's very likely that some conservatives will come forward over the issue of changing the constitution, and they may have a bit to say about that. From time to time, episodic arrangements, or even, I won't use the word alliance, it suggests something very different. Let's just say arrangements can even be reached with all sorts of people. That's assuredly true. But the nationalists must never lose sight of what their final objective is, which is Australia first, winning Australian independence.
Now, there were different results state by state, seat by seat, suburb by suburb.
Indeed.
Would you describe it as a strange election result?
Yes, it's highly inconsistent. It's more inconsistent than ever. From a nationalist point of view, that tends to reflect the total fragmentation of the traditional Australian community, the entrance into the voting milieu of new groups, mainly from the outside, and also the mobilisation of, I use the word identity, not as we would use it, but this identitarian politics that's often used by the Greens and others, you know, transgender or something along these lines, pseudo-identity politics. It's mobilisation of constituencies. These constituencies now make up the underpinnings of trader class rule in Australia. They're battering rams against the old Australia, and they will be ruthlessly used. Some of these teal independents do have those agendas. Where the ALP is not maybe desirous of putting their own flag in their hat and wearing it, they can send these people out as reliable satellites to do the battering. And I predict that these teal independents, it's going to be a hayride, and a lot of what they're going to bring forward will in fact be anti-Australian. They're not really representing women. Most of these teal independents are already empowered women who share in the system. They're little bourgeois, you know, who make up, as you said, parts of the chattering classes. There's nothing, let's just say, ordinary working class or farming woman about them. That's not who they are. They belong to the apparatus. If they're not in media, they're in commerce or something along these lines. They're people who seek advantage, but they seek advantage in their own particular way. And they're not necessarily happy with going through the rigmarole of the old party system. They've broken from that. That's a positive thing from our point of view, because it breaks down the old party system. Nationalists can't operate in the old party system. That's impossible, albeit our role in elections, of course, is very different. That's certainly for sure. But if nationalists did elect anyone into parliaments, it'd be a fluke. It would be an unusual thing. But it's the breakdown of the party system on the ground. It's the breakdown of the relationship, say, of the ALP with the unions, or the breakdown of the Nationals with certain farmers' organisations, or the Liberals with certain business groups. All these things are now positive, and they've been put on the table. Here they are. This is the election that we just had.
Now, Labor will be as aware as Liberals are. Now, Liberals, of course, are, in utter disarray. They've copped a real shellacking. But Labor will obviously be in a real rush to implement their changes because there's no telling 3 years out from now what the political landscape may be. If we take what we've seen from the results and what you've said, that there's a split in the chattering classes. Now, there's a possibility that just some of them may, in fact, divorce themselves from, what we generically refer to as the left. They may even move into erstwhile conservative camps.
Well, parties like the Liberal Democrats are perfect for that final objective. These sort of groups, yeah, they can go anywhere you like, assuredly so. And but from our point of view, we have a terrible thing on our hands with the fact that the residue, the detritus of the old conservatism like One Nation and so on are in fact still with us. I know there are some people who were speculating that Mrs Hanson may lose her seat. If I was a betting man, I would say no, I don't believe so. But One Nation also has been mortally wounded in this. The game that One Nation's played for years is the fer-de-lance of conservatism. That's not going to wash too well either. The so-called Conservatives will need to reintegrate their camp as much as possible. I'm not even sure now, even over the last several days, Hanson will have a role, I suppose, in conservatism, but exactly what it is, who knows. So an electoral gap, but more importantly, a community gap will begin to open up. And there are many places where that gap exists. There's members of One Nation, part of the voting parts of One Nation, part of the voting parts and the memberships of groups like Shooters and Fishers. There could be other elements in the seniors milieu and whatnot, who may notionally become available to Nationalists for organisation. This offers a potential that hasn't been around for a long time.
So it's not necessarily the end of the world, is it?
Well, it's only if people have an electoral perspective, and again, those people who listen to certain conservative commentators who believe that Anthony Albanese is a Bolshevik and the red flag will fly high and all. This is cuckoo politics. This is something out of the DLP of the 1950s. This is not true. The ALP are globalist, if I can use the lefty word for a moment. The ALP are globalist capitalists. That's what they are. That's the system they defend. They don't belong on the left. But from time to time, because of their origin, they can project a certain face. I had an argument with a conservative not too long ago who was going on about the unions and how the trade unions had a terrible influence over the ALP and they were going to drag the ALP to the left. And I said, matey, you haven't grasped the point yet. It isn't the unions that control the ALP, it's the ALP that controls the unions. They're used as deceiver tools amongst ordinary workers. Oh, come to us and we'll keep your jobs, or come to us and we'll do things right for you. But of course, we'll be supporting Labor. They are structures, and out of the unions come the ALP politicians and so forth. You can see the same on the so-called conservative side of politics with certain structures too. Old labels are breaking down. At best, the right face of a Dutton or the left face of some ex-union boss in the ALP, that's all it is. It's something out of the matrix. It's chimera. It doesn't exist. These parties, there's no left or right inside this state machine, but there are images that the machine can generate to the deception of the population. We do live now, to use the old Chinese phrase, in interesting times.
Well, and if the US is any reflection of that, this globalist capitalist entity becomes split when identity politics become a major source of their proselytising.
Yes, they will have a problem with that. The system has always relied on structures that have supported it. If the Globo model of breaking down everything. No more tradition, no more country, no more anything at all. Simple cogs in an industrial, commercial and whatever machine. That therefore means that some of the former props of the order are not necessary anymore. For argument's sake, in Australia, certain Christian people have often been props of Liberal Party rule. That's true. Now, however, they may find themselves pushed out by the new groups that will be the chosen groups to carry out the Globo revolution. What that actually means is some of these people may fall into the category of being dissenters. Nationalists have to be dissenters. Therefore, we're looking around for anyone at all who begins to dissent. It doesn't necessarily make us all good mates, but it simply means that that's where fundamental change actually begins, dissent.
I'm surprised that that catchment of satellite parties that the Liberals put out failed to, well,
let's talk about anything. The great Australians. I don't mean insult any decent person. There are some decent people. A very, very low vote. Groups like the Federation Party, very, very low vote. They are now effectively satellites of Hanson. Who knows what will happen to them? The Values Party, the same thing. Hanson, of course, the decline in her vote. There has been an implosion of the One Nation vote. Pauline's now high and dry. Her traditional role has to be rethought. So in reality, a lot of these parties, they may themselves enter a period of fundamental crisis. Is that a good thing? Well, I can't say it's a bad thing. In fact, I'd have to say to our listeners, readers, supporters, everyone in nationalism, that we can never proceed with a nationalist movement if everything is simply all running smoothly in our country, if everything's systematised, everyone's happy. That's not the way politics, you get political change. So thankfully, what we saw on the surface of Australian politics in that election the other day seems to indicate that we're entering a period of instability. If that is so, then there are opportunities to develop nationalist politics and organisation.
But what happened to all that anger post-COVID, during COVID, not even post-COVID? What happened to all that anger? All those freedom-minded people waving red ensigns and wearing akubra hats and marching, and they were going to make a political statement out of it, and Ricardo Bosey was going to, soak up that anger, and all these different, and I don't see where it's all right.
Firecrackers, and the interesting, there's firecrackers, not an explosion, but firecrackers. A lot of them went around Clive Palmer. Clive Palmer had a lot to say about this and this, but when you look into Clive Palmer's actual policy and the actual ideology of it, he's a system conservative. Anyone who can't see that, to me, it's as plain as, the proverbial nose on face. There it is.
Oh, he's a bloody miner.
He's a mining billionaire. I remember on the issue of refugees a few years ago, he wanted to fly them in at the airport. No more boats, no more processing. They just fly in and they get processed at the airport. And if they're genuine, they stay. And if they're not, he'll send them home by plane. What sort of lunacy is this? I mean, you look at these, I'll use the word, these capitalists. What do they really want? They want cheap labour, compliant labour. That's what they want. That's part of Clive. He makes a lot of noise about the Chinese. Yes, he did. But that's from a profit angle. He says it's patriotism. I'd like to believe it is, but I really don't accept that either. It's all about money. And if money could be made by dealing with China, Uncle Clive would deal with China. So really, they gave their money and time to this guy, and that's it. Finish. He may wind up this party. He could merge it with Pauline. He could go back to the LNP. Who knows what he will do? Whatever he does, it's not nationalist politics. But with a BUT, there is one caveat on that. Some of the genuine people who were mobilised here will not go home. They'll wonder what all this is about. And I think the collective experience, and some of us have been through this over the last 7 or 8 years, anti-Islam movements, contrived, Liberal Party front, pro-South Africa farmer movements, contrived, Now there's a pseudo, and I repeat pseudo, let us warn you about China movement. Fraud. Now we've got the possibility of a freedom movement that came out over the issues of vaccine. Thousands and thousands of decent people raising issues of employment and other things for Australians. Where will it be in 12 months? I'd say most of it will be wound up. But some people will stay for the next ride. They'll wonder what this was. They'll draw conclusions.
All of these movements are hijacked by the grifters, and
well, that's Mr. Bossy. That's what he is. Yeah. And there are similar people like that in that broad milieu. And but the old saying, experienced teachers. And what is it? Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people some of the time, all of the time, but not everyone all the time. And I don't believe, after about 4 of these movements in Australian politics in the last 7 years or so, 8 years or so, I do not believe that the broad mass of Australians will be fooled again.
Well, this result, as you say, but it is immaterial which party sits in office. It's simply how Australia's voted and determining their attitudes. That's information that's instructive to us. But people have to bear in mind, and Thomas Sowell said it, that there's only 2 major concerns of any politician. 1, getting elected. 2, staying elected. Any of your concerns and issues come very much after that. Now,
I'll make the point there. That's certainly the individual politician's interest, but those who pay him have another interest. They want him to conform to why they put him there. So yes, this politician may duck and weave and lie to the public. Again, I said to some well-meaning voters recently who were complaining about their politicians, oh, they're lazy, they're this and this. I said, matey, our politicians are the most dedicated, the most efficient, the most gifted people in everything they do. There's only one trouble, mate. They don't work for you. And that's the point. They don't. They're full of dissimulation, lying, untruthfulness. That's their job. And until people see that that's what it is, you'll get whole new lots of these, nice people maybe getting elected into Parliament, and they're going to wonder where the bloody hell they are. It's Alice in Wonderland. And all my funny meanderings in life, I've only ever met one politician, Graham Campbell, to his great credit, who ever knew how to use a Parliament. Or there was a couple of greenies who do for their own agendas, but by and large, no one knows how to use it. If you've actually got the good fortune, say, to be a maverick and you end up there, you've got to figure out how to use it. And it's very rare that you find anyone who can.
I think another thing to take out of what we've seen with this result is that the division that is dramatic as anything in the US has come here, and yes. That division is going to be exacerbated, I think, very much by an Aboriginal, a totally unnecessary Aboriginal voice in the Constitution. Now, that's something I really want to ask about. Let's get down to the more of that. What will it mean?
What it will mean is, on the surface, small L Liberals feel good. It also means that some people in the Aboriginal industry, and I use that word very advisedly, the industry of Aboriginality, not the black fella sitting in a riverbed at Alice Springs, no, but some people who've managed that word before, grifters, in the Aboriginal world and have become empowered. The thing that it really does mean is that the Australian state, which has to be legal, gives up part of its sovereignty. And it makes the assumption, the statement, that its sovereignty isn't total. Its sovereignty is not complete. In some manner or other, the sovereignty of Australia doesn't quite exist because of the problems of colonial settlement after 1788. I always say, well, be very careful what you wish for. These Liberals who wish to reinterpret Australian law on the basis that the Australian state is illegal, if you do that, someone overseas is going to take you at your word. It is illegal. Many years ago, there was a professor who was debating land rights from the University of Osaka. He was a lecturer in Japan, and he said the aim of the land rights movement is to make Australian borders more porous. Now, I'm quite sure Eddie Mabo, whatever the rights and wrongs of Eddie Mabo are, he didn't know that, but that's what his court case was about, according to these Australian Liberals. In my view, what it does, no Aborigines should vote for it. They should repudiate it. They should have nothing to do with it. No statements from the heart from Uluru, no carrying on about settlement in 1788. It's the globalist settlement that is the real question now. And the old Aboriginal world is also being put aside. And I don't mean the pre-colonial world, I mean the last 50 years of a pseudo-Aboriginal agitation, and a fair-minded one around certain reforms. I can't say that's not valid. But the Aboriginal industry agitation has now pushed Aborigines. I heard the words the other night. The oldest culture inside our multicultural society. What? The Aborigines have got nothing to do with our multicultural society. They are completely separate. They are who they are. That is the fair dinkum Aboriginal people are who they are. They don't need some little multicultural brat from Marrickville to define them. But that's what they're now going to do. So they want to reduce Aboriginality to a factor of multiculturalism.
Yeah, they've been tokenised and
become
a virtue signalling cause, but that is entirely disingenuous. So I have to ask you, it's like you go visit a government website and it's got a disclaimer, we recognise the Wudjiroo people of blah, 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 but how? What? And this is the question with this voicing constitution. What does the black dollar get out of it?
Nothing. And does anyone really believe that the migrant hordes that are now starting to arrive in Australia from the subcontinent and other places tear a tinker's cuss for an Aboriginal person? No, they don't. They've got nothing to do with it. They don't have the experience that Europeans, the good side and the bad side of all of it. We have the experience of over 230 odd years of relationship with Aboriginal Australia. They don't. They see the Aborigines as an unfortunate leftover of colonialism. If they could cleanse them, they probably would. And now we find in the Northern Territory that some of the land rights claims may be renegotiated by cattle corporations and other things linked to the Asian economy. Of course this is going to happen. No blackfella should imagine for one moment that some stupid voice in the Constitution is going to give him anything, because it isn't, because it's not intended to. It's propaganda to mobilise, propaganda to incite. There will be some people in the Aboriginal community who take this as genuine, and they'll also believe that anyone who protests against it is some sort of wicked person who wants to do Aborigines harm. What a crock. The harm is being done by liberalism. It is not being done by the Nationalists. So this drive of Albanese and co to enforce this, to force this upon the Australian nation, should lead to resistance. It's got nothing to do with Aborigines, but it's certainly got everything to do with Australia's place in the global economy. That's the problem. There is a political economy now to the Aboriginal industry. That's what we have to now expose.
Where do you think Labor's going to be on defence?
Well, have they decided to go neutral on the issue of Ukraine? Well, no, they haven't. Vlad the Impaler is still the #1 enemy of human civilization, and he's about to pull a Hitler in the Kremlin and all the rest of it. That's the propaganda. That's where they want to go. They will follow the United States to the South Korean border with North Korea. They will follow the United States into a war, if necessary, over Taiwan. This is what they want. They'll try to bring pressure, if they can, on India, which is part of this Quad. But India, of course, is neutral on the Russo-Ukraine war. They'll do their best to buy India's favour. How do you buy India's favour? Well, you open up the doors to immigration. And there's certainly a number of Indians who would welcome immigration to Australia. They'll do everything they can to be running dogs. I love that old phrase. They are running dogs. They'll do their best to be the USA's running dog.
Right. Look, here's a question. Do you think that Ukraine and the Azov battalion have made neo-Nazism terribly unfashionable?
Oh, look, I know you're heading towards conclusion now, but I'll say this. Over the many years, the certain journalists, particularly the Fairfax cockroach class, have attempted to associate Australian nationalism with neo-Nazis. They do this all the time. They try to say that Australia First and our friends and allies have got something to do with some rat bag, and that this Azov battalion would have a much greater claim to be mucking around with neo-Nazism than we would. But they've given it a get out of Nuremberg free card, and they won't discuss it, they won't raise it, they say it's lies, it couldn't be so, and that they've officially exonerated them. I would actually love it if they would use the same force of exoneration for real idiots as Azov are to cease the campaign on us. I think they've shown that they're very, very selective in who they point the finger at in that regard. So let's have a closer look in the media in future times as the truth comes out about this Azov and Joe Biden's connection to it and everything else. Let's get some truth.
What do you think is going to happen with the Liberals? Because one of the things that has led to their dissolution is that enmity between the left side and the hard right of the party, which I think the hard right was responsible for all those satellites.
Yes, that's right. These are faces inside the Liberal Party that are part of its origins. The Liberal Party was both an amalgam of conservatism and an amalgam of, I'll call it a type of progressivism, where you get rich, you change the society through your own achievement, you extend wealth, but only by creating of it, and money drips off you on everyone else. That strikes me as very well tealish. The Liberals have always had those two aspects inside their party. If they fragment and you get some much more liberally thing, there will be a tendency on the part of certain, and I repeat, absolutely pseudo, patriotic, or even a few people who claim to be nationalists, who might even claim, the Liberal Party is becoming like us. They miss the point about the history of Australian conservatism. Australian conservatism is as much an enemy of what we want to do for our country. We must crush conservatism. This conservatism cannot serve where our country has to go. A conservative, as one fellow put to me as a person, often who'll say my country right or wrong, and they put their hand to their heart. It sounds very, very good. A nationalist is a person who knows when his country is wrong, or there is something wrong in his country and he wants to change it. That's the difference. Conservatives never really learn, that is the honest ones. But then what would an honest conservative be doing in the Liberal Party? I'd really have to ask that question too.
Yeah, it's not representative of, and that I think is one of the reasons they were smashed at the polls.
Well, we've met honest conservatives. I've met a few people who are honest conservatives. That they'll be very decent to you. They'll exchange information.
It's the same problem that's afflicted the Republicans in America. Which is where that expression "conservative" came from. The complete capitulation to the agitating progressives.
Correct.
And and that's left nothing but the real thing, which is a large block and angry. And in meantime, as that is destroyed following the election result, you get the bloody Greens getting pushed up, who I think are probably the most dangerous party in Australia.
Yeah, they're a fer de lance. They open the doors up to other things. If you look at conservatism in Australia, you take someone like Mark Latham, who at least has the vestiges of intelligence. But Mark Latham said a few years ago now he actually wanted to use the Race Discrimination Board to force the creation of one nation, so all Australians, regardless of origin, creed, colour, race, would be forced to be Australians. That's the definition of conservatism. That's Hanson's definition.
I know it's also the weak side of it, because conservatism should mean retaining tradition. And if you're to be genuine to that ethos, then that means retaining
ethnic identity. Well, they're not on about this. Conservatism in Australia ditched that. Some people say that Menzies would never have done this, Menzies was a conservative and whatever. Maybe Menzies would not have done it. It doesn't excuse Pig Iron Bob for what he did, but maybe he wouldn't. But those sort of days are long gone, and we have to look at the Liberal Party now as absolute historical junk. And indeed, it is junk. And it's actually based on a mythology that's now 80 years old, that has worn itself out. It's played itself out. And as happens in other countries, you look at, say, frog politics, French politics only recently, the traditional parties, the equivalent of Labour in France, the Socialists, and the equivalent of the Liberals, the Republicans, have been totally destroyed by this entity called Macron. He's had to refashion the globalist politics in France because the old machines have collapsed. In the collapse of the old machines, you get gaps begin to appear in French politics, hence you get new forces, as we well know, both forces that are traditionally called left and some that are called right, but new forces. This is something that now is very likely to occur in Australia. There will be new forces here. The normal parties that we're used to will continue to have crisis within them. As they do, people fall out of the arrangement. A lot of these people may head down what I will now call the dissident road. You can't make a nationalist out of a soft-minded person, a liberal, and you can't make a nationalist out of a person who is so hung up on Menziesite tradition that he's a true believer too. But you can make a nationalist out of a person who has decided to challenge. That at least is possible. And we have to look at that.
A nationalist has to embrace his left and right side.
Well, in a funny sort of way, yeah, the left and right sides of the brain, yes, he does. And he needs to look very carefully at who he is, what he is, where he's going, what his cause is, what's the end of this cause. And this election, I must say, quite a lot of people have spoken to myself and other nationalists in the last day or two, and they are seeing opportunity here. I believe there is an opportunity, but I'll leave you now on this single statement that it is now incumbent on the Australian Nationalists to truly get their act together. We've only got a limited amount of time to do that, and full effort has to be put into doing that, or we'll miss the boat. So
on that point, I just want to say, don't blame the leadership. It's time for the members to stand up.
All the members must step forward. All of our members and any other members of genuine nationalist groups must now step forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. I'll speak to you later.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good night.